Can you guys hear me okay? Just want to make sure I'm talking loud enough and that my microphone is working well enough here. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm currently a student at the Rolf Institute. I've been a yoga teacher, Reiki master, resume writer since before I was ever writing resumes professionally, which is how I got into it. I've always been a sort of writer, and I had family and friends always coming to me and asking for help, and eventually turned it into a profession. And it related a lot to what I had been doing, you know, even in my college career. I was an English literature major, and my whole college career was writing essays. And so in writing an essay, I would take a thesis statement and take that whole essay and relate it to whatever body of work I was talking about. So citing passages, citing, you know, things from the story that related to prove my thesis. And this relates to resume writing because your resume is citing your body of work, literally the work that you've done. So to me, a resume it's relatable. It's the same thing. It's a written body of work that expresses what you've done in your life, essentially, in a short piece of work. That gives you the opportunity to talk about all of those experiences that you've done. That's the thing that gets you the interview, that gets you that whole conversation that really allows whoever's going to hire you get to know who you are. All right. So I'll give you a little hint of what we're really getting to. They are called SAR statements. Feel free to write that down. We're going to come back to it later. But SAR statements are derived from your stories that are all about you and what you've done in your lifetime and all of your work that you've done from any job you've ever done, all of those experiences you've had. And SAR stands for situation, action, and result. We'll come back to that later. So we'll start with the basics of a resume. You probably all have a resume of some sort, have done it at some point, even just a basic one, or seen one. So of course we've got your contact information, professional title, your bio, and when you do those storytelling exercises, that's when you get all that information, and that's going to help you come up with your bio. Sometimes I think people sit down and just say, I've got to write a bio. Who am I? You know, how do I do this? And it's hard to do. And that's why people get frustrated with it. That's why they come to people like me or other people who do this kind of thing and ask, you know, how do I go, like, how do I express who I am? How do I say that in a nutshell, you know, in a short paragraph? And I'll give you a hint, it takes a little bit of work. I guess by a little bit, I mean a lot. By a lot, I mean about 8 hours, I would say, to set that aside for yourself. 8 hours of work. However you decide to break that down, whether you just, you know, bang it out in one day, schedule it over the course of a week, 2 hours a day, or even, you know, a week plus. But plan to dedicate that much time to sitting down with yourself and writing down these stories. That's what helps you get to the bio. So contact information, professional title, who you are, your bio, educational history, work history, that kind of thing. These are just the basic lists of information that you're going to have in a resume. And one place you can go, there's a number of places you can go. One place that I recommend is called Live Career. And they're going to offer you templates that are going to have these titles that you can put in there yourself. You can click this title or that title, or rearrange how they're arranged on the actual resume. Depending on relevancy, you might want to put your professional experience above your education, or your education above your professional experience. Maybe you've had more education than experience. So those kinds of things come into play once I actually sit down with individual people to talk about, talk about their experiences. Then we determine how it's arranged. So yeah, contact information, professional title, bio, areas of expertise, educational history, work history. Yeah, those things are all arranged on this piece of paper called a resume. I'm just going to show you some quick resumes here. It doesn't matter that you can't read them. This is really just a visual thing as far as what they look like at a glance. So I'm going to show you one. I'm going to try to, and we'll just see a little bit of a difference between the next one that I'll show you here. And then we've got this one. So is there anything that you notice? Maybe I can put them side by side. I'm going to block my own face out right now. I'll try to do this. Can you see some differences? Can anybody name a difference that you see between the two? What is something that you're noticing?
I mean, there's a lot more text on the one in your left hand.
Right.
And it reads as that person may have done more, but I'm not going to read all that.
Okay. There is actually I'm gonna skip ahead to. I have a list of do nots and a list of do's. So one thing that we do not do anymore in resumes is write an objective. We all want a job, so that's clearly the objective. And for a long time, we would write something like seeking a position as a professional yoga teacher. And now it's that goes without saying. So we don't write the objective anymore. In place of the objective, you write your professional bio. Blank space. So I'll come back to the two resumes here. This one has a lot of blank space, and Patrick, you noted that this one has more writing. And these are all just bullet points, one single sentence, but that fills up the page a little bit more. So it's a bit more of a substantial resume as opposed to this one where we've got short sentences, a lot of blank space at the bottom, and the name is bolded there. That one's good. This name is bolded too. Actually, I think I grabbed the wrong one. Sorry. This one, that's a name. This name you can see. So instead of blank space, we want to check the layout of the resume. So checking that we don't have a lot of blank space at the bottom and that we'd have smaller margins. Let's take a look at this one again. So we have big margins on the sides on this one. Everything is kind of bunched up in the middle with small font. And this one, we've got smaller margins all around, so it fills the page, and we've got larger font, and we can read the name. Not technically here, but when it's in front of you, you can read the name. So we manage the blank space by just checking our layout, extending our sentences. So when we look at this one, we can see that they're shorter. They don't extend to the end of the page. And when we do something like this, we see that we've got just a bulkier sentence that's going to have more information. And visually, when someone looks at your resume, this one looks like there's a bit more experience here, that someone took time to organize, that someone has a lot to say about what they've done, as opposed to this one that potentially was maybe just thrown together quickly and not too much thought put into the organization of it on the page exactly. Let's see. First person. I don't think it happens too much, but it is a thing that some people, when they're writing their resume, they start with the objective, which we don't do anymore. But they'll use I, I've done this, I'm looking for a job. And we don't use first person in resumes. So in place of that, you would use an adjective, a noun, an adverb, a past tense action verb. You would say something like, refer to yourself as a skilled yoga teacher, a highly trained instructor. You would say something in a bullet point in reference to yourself, such as created a successful studio by doing whatever you did. So yeah, just taking care with the grammar and language that we use. So no first person describing yourself in other ways. I still see sometimes references on resumes, and that's not something we do anymore. There's no need to put a reference on there. If you do want to mention that references are available, you can do that in a cover letter, which, side note, I recommend doing a cover letter. It's always a good thing if that ends up being a question, should I do one? Yes, that is also an opportunity just to lead into getting your resume looked at, which ultimately leads into getting an interview. So just another small step to those many steps. So references you can mention in your cover letter that they're available. You don't have to list them. You can have a separate sheet with those. And the last thing to not do on resumes is time gaps. So if there was a time in your life where you were between jobs, or maybe you were traveling for some time, or just out of work for whatever reason, maybe you were studying, you want to explain that somehow, and you can make that a section in your resume. And this is the kind of thing that is worked through when you sit down and write your stories down, or work with a resume writer to talk about how to fill that gap. But you don't want gaps of work that leaves a question in whoever's, the hiring manager. It was a question in their mind, like what was going on here, and people start to draw assumptions that maybe you wouldn't want to be drawn. So for example, I didn't work for a year. I lived outside the country for 4 years. I taught English in South Korea. I lived in Costa Rica, and I lived out of a van for a number of months, and did some studies and did some work and travel. And I just wrote that in my resume. I just had it as a section right in there with my professional experience. I was traveling, I was studying, I was learning, I was experiencing, and I just wrote bullet points about those. So I kind of have the thing with, there are ways to do things. That's definitely a resume thing that you can do that. And there are specific protocols, but also do what makes sense, do what feels right, So if you want to make mention of something, you feel like it's necessary, it speaks of who you are, and it fills something in there that needs to be filled, then go ahead and do it. And do it with counsel if you need, find a resume writer or Google some things. But yeah, feel free to fill in those gaps, or add things about yourself that are beneficial to express. Yeah, so do not do objective. We're having a professional bio in place of that. No blank space. You can check your layout, run the margins, check your sentences. No use of first person. Refer to yourself as a skilled yoga teacher using adjectives, nouns. In your bullet points, you will just make mention of what you've done, as opposed to saying I did. You would say created, that kind of thing. No references. You can mention them in your cover letter. And time gaps can be filled. So if you come across a time that you're not sure what to put there, you can come up with something. And that's when we come back to the storytelling, the SAR statements, that kind of thing. Let's see. So I mentioned the time. Time is a big part of it. And I say this because I get a lot of people calling me, friends texting, this kind of thing, like, oh my gosh, I need a resume. Can you meet me tonight? Or can I just send you all my stuff and then you'll just give it back to me? And I'm like, it doesn't really work like that. It's a big endeavor. So for me to just take someone's old resumes and, all their detailed information that I first mentioned, contact information, jobs, what, time frames they work those jobs, that's great. But for me to write a really great resume about someone, I have to know who they are. And same thing for you. Obviously, you know yourselves, but you can get to know yourselves even more when you sit down and think about your past experiences. And in writing out those details and asking even more questions about these experiences, little light bulbs will start to go off. You'll have these epiphanies. You'll start to see how one thing relates to another. Words to express who you are will pop into your head. You'll start writing this word and that word, and then slowly piecing it in together to a cohesive resume. But it really just starts with sort of brainstorming about the things that you've done in your life. And this is what helps you to know or learn what your niche is. And even if you know it already, you might get even further insight on that through the stories. You'll figure out who you are, your skills, what you enjoy, your previous experience, and then even come up with, and again, you might know already, but you might get, another light bulb might go off. Who are you teaching to? And these things just start to become really even clearer for you. So yeah, writing. And you don't have to be a great writer to tell your own stories. So no need for apprehension about that. You can just write, this thing happened and these people were, this was occurring and then I jumped in and then, it's really just like you're gossiping about, these details. So it doesn't have to be even, really fluid for that matter. I always like to say to trust that your previous jobs and skills will transfer. So I don't know each of your situations. We're all here, I understand, because we're yoga teachers wanting to know, how do I, say who I am and what I do on a resume. But I imagine you all have other jobs that you've done or are doing and would like to possibly bring those experiences into your resume. And so I like to say this, just trust that those experiences are relevant and will transfer. And that will come through, and the way that will come through is when you write your stories down. I keep coming back to these stories. This is the biggest thing. This is the most time-consuming thing for you to sit down. And if I were to sit down with someone, even after they've written the stories that we get their situation, action, result statements from, I still ask even more questions. So you're answering questions, reading through your answers, and then digging even a little deeper to get more details on how you're going to go about putting this together for yourself. So just a couple stories about how previous job skills can transfer. I worked for a couple years as a hiring manager for a natural foods company. So I hired people as demo reps to go into grocery stores and sell products. So if you've ever been into Whole Foods and you've seen the little demo tables where people are sampling food, I would hire people to do that. It's a fun job. You don't have to have a lot of experience, but people come from all walks of life. And I remember not getting a lot of resumes, even though it was requested that you send in your resume. We still needed to hire people, so I would still call people back. And this one woman, for example, she said, "Oh, but I've been a nurse for 25 years. Like it's not relevant. I don't, what does this have to do with this?" And so through the interview, I just got her to tell me a little bit more. And I just said, "Well, as a nurse, what did you do?" And she mentioned giving medication. Well, how did you go about doing that? And you tell them the information, the side effects, how it's gonna benefit them. And I said, that's the same exact thing. We're standing at a table, passing out food, saying what's in it, how it's going to affect their body, how to take it, how much to take, what the benefits are, what not to do. Don't take too much, sometimes they're vitamins, that kind of thing. And so these light bulbs were going off for people. And I had this conversation with, I want to say almost everybody. It's these interviews sometimes, in a way turned into pep talks for people. They were like, but I can't do, my resume, it doesn't matter. And I would say, no, but it does. Like, tell me more about this. That relates to this in precisely this way. So again, through the storytelling, going back and thinking about the jobs that you've done, these little epiphanies will happen. These little light bulbs will go off. You'll start to see how one relates to the other. You'll come up with the words that link those things, and you'll be able to put that into a bullet point. And those bullet points are the really powerful parts of your resume. Those are the parts that say who you are and what you've done. And that's what really, it's who you are. People can know how long you were at a job. They can see that you were at this job for 6 years, and that's great. But They want to know what you did there. Yeah, so another example is myself. I'm still a server at this point, a waitress, paying for school, among other jobs. But when I first was serving, I served for a long time, and then I taught 4th and 5th grade for 4 years. And I remember going in, teaching and realizing this is the same exact thing. I have a room full of people all sitting at a table. It's somewhat chaotic. They all need something, and I have to remember what all of them need, and I have to multitask. It's the same thing in a way. So again, just reflecting on the jobs that you've done and how they relate. So if I were to, say go back in time and say, oh, but I've been a waitress. I've never been a teacher before. I can't get hired. Instead of going about it that way, to sit down, write out the stories. What did I do as a server? What kinds of things did I manage? What was what scenarios did I encounter? And then relate that to what happens when you're going to be a teacher. And you can do this as a yoga teacher as well. How are you managing your classes? Those kinds of things. How do you prepare for your classes? How do those, reflecting back, how do those actions relate to things you've done in the past? And in telling those stories through the bullet points, you just bulk up your resume, and whoever's going to potentially interview you really has a great idea of who you are before meeting you. And that is what gets you the interview, is that they really get to know who you are before meeting you. Let's see. So SAR statements. So this is the big part. This is where that 8 hours of work is done. The sitting down, writing things out. Maybe not the 8 hours, because some of that time is going to be actually writing the resume, but many hours of just reflecting on these things and writing them down. Challenging incidents, situations where you feel like you thrived, times where you felt that your actions brought benefit to a situation, just a time where your skills shined and where you really felt like you excelled. And when I say skills shine, there are different skills to consider: soft skills and hard skills. So soft skills are things like patient, intuitive, it could be quick-witted, any of those personal skills. And then hard skills are things like computer skills. And, in today's day, we would say maybe you've got some social media experience, you know how to use certain apps, that kind of thing. And you want to make mention of those too, because you never know when that could be of benefit to whoever you're going to work for. That when you put those little things in there, they might say, aha, like, I can use this person for this thing. They'll be teaching yoga, but maybe they can also post on their social media page. That could be the little thing that helps them to remember you. So it is important to add these skills that you have. So SAR statements, I like to call them CAR statements, but if you Google SAR statements, you'll come up with more information on that for when you're sitting down to do this on your own. But it stands for situation, action, results. I like to call it challenge, action, result. Just gonna find my notes here. So I have an example here that I'll read. This position was someone who was a demo rep. That's someone who does the sampling in the grocery stores. Demo rep for Vega. It's a protein shake company. This is really simple. I'll just show you briefly. I know you can't see it, but you can see that these are just one sentence each to do these SAR statements. And when I've worked with people, I've had a page to 2 pages of storytelling for one situation. And you can get a handful of bullet points for that. It's not that you're doing one SAR statement for one bullet point. It's that you can do an SAR statement about one situation, and from that situation have a lot of aha moments that you're like, I did this thing, I created this thing, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point for that one job, or somehow relates to another job. So challenge, action, results. The position was a demo rep for Vega. The challenge / situation. I had many people complaining about the price of the product. So this person was trying to sample. Everybody coming up to the table was like, oh, it's too expensive. So what did she do? She, in response, expressed how the price compared to others in the store, as well as noting all the health and convenience benefits. So just by doing her job and telling people about the product and doing some price comparison, the result is that she sold 12 containers in 3 hours. And so here's what we do with that. We start with challenge, action, result, and we turn that into a bullet point that starts with the results plus the action. So the sentence that I have down here is the bullet point. And it says, created more than $700 in sales in 3 hours with thorough product knowledge and persuasive comparative pricing. So here's another side note. Quantify things if you can. Turn it into numbers. That could be monetary. It could be amount that you sold. It can be the time frame within which you sold it. It could be the number of students in your class. It could be the increase in sales from the number of students in your class at a possible studio. I worked with someone who's a massage therapist, and after going through her SAR statement, one of them, which was a couple pages, we ultimately quantified the turnaround time for a physical healing situation. So typically, you know, and this came through conversation. So I asked more questions and more questions based on, you know, what she had written. And I ended up asking, well, so something like this type of injury, how long does it usually take to heal? And she said, usually takes people about 2 months on average. And I said, and how long did it take this person to heal? And it took a few weeks. So we did some math and we said, you know, the healing time was, I don't remember exactly how I wrote it, but it was a, you know, 65% improvement, something like that. So if you can consider your stories that you have for yourself and turn those stories into numbers, that becomes hardcore facts for a company that's potentially going to hire you. Yeah, so I guess I didn't leave space for questions in between, but we've got some space right now, and we can go back to anything. Maybe you guys have written something down or have a question about something I referred to. I can go back and mention anything else that you want to return to, or answer general questions that you have. Is anything coming up for you?
Yeah, and remember, you can always use the chat box too if you don't want to speak out loud, if that feels more comfortable.
Mm-hmm. So resume writing, like I mentioned, it's mostly to do with your stories. So this call is giving a really basic, this is how you go about doing it. This is how you start the process. These are some basic do's and don'ts. But when working with people, what I've noticed for myself is that it really turns into a sort of counseling session, actually, where someone has determined the job that they want, and there are some times where they say, oh, I'd like to add this thing back in, and we've already discussed how that resume is focused, and so through conversation we decide to leave something out. You know, maybe that person says, but if I don't get the job, I want to be sure that I put this in there. And you want to keep it focused to what you want. And I think as maybe as yoga teachers, we have some insight on that, where you can just stay true to your path and stay in alignment with what you're seeking, what you're asking for in your work, and trusting that process. So if you catch yourself saying like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to get the job, I might want to tuck this thing in here. You can trust the process there and keep your resume focused to what you're looking for. And on that note, you might have 2 or 3 resumes. That's a thing. It's a thing to have resume as a yoga teacher, resume as a server, you know, that kind of thing. And at the same time, sort of use some of that information interchangeably. If you can relate serving to being a yoga teacher, you know, we find a way to do that. But it's totally normal to have more than one resume. Yeah. Trying to think of any yoga specific stuff. Did someone have a question?
Well, I was just thinking maybe if we could, and maybe one of you have a concrete example of a job that you've had, and then translating that into what a yoga teacher does, kind of thing. Like you're talking about being a waitress, for example, and working with customer service, clientele, meeting people's needs. I mean, I feel like in a lot of ways that's what we're doing at the front desk as yoga teachers. So
Yeah.
maybe a few more like concrete examples of translating a job and a skill in one job into what yoga teachers are actually doing in the studios. Patrick,
Yeah, is my stuff working?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I normally, if there's a specific job I'm applying for, you go to the company page, go to the job offering kind of page, and pull out words that they use in the job offering and find a way to describe things you've already done using their language.
Yes.
If that makes sense. So if it's, if there's the common, 4 different words that show up all the time, figure out a way to work those 4 words into describing how you've done your work in the past, why you're looking for that job, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I take on a client, I have them send me a list of potential jobs or a specific job that they would want or be strategically looking for, like an exact one, like you're saying. And then, yes, exactly. Then we take words from that and work it into the bullet points so that they seem to be, or, obviously express themselves as a clear fit for that job. So yes, thank you for mentioning that. That is absolutely a thing to do, a good thing to do. And also on that note, use a thesaurus. When you think of some words that you'd like to use, and you want to change it up, maybe rather than saying created at every bullet point or that kind of thing, just get a thesaurus and come up with some other ways to express what you've done. And like Patrick mentioned, look at some job hiring, some ads, and see what kind of words they're using, and then you can work that into your resume too.
So I think one challenge, if you're going to a studio and you're wanting to be hired to teach yoga, the studio doesn't necessarily teach the job. And Claire, I think you were mentioning that too before. I don't know if you want to say anything, but by doing some research in how the studio even describes what it offers, right? Because studios may not be posting specific, we're hiring yoga teachers kind of jobs. Sometimes they'll post a specific, we're hiring a manager type job, but I think a lot of the yoga industry, you're almost creating the jobs. So I don't know if there's some way to tie that into resume, or if Claire, if you have any ideas, since you've kind of been on the ground doing it.
Yeah.
It's loud where you are.
Sounded like air conditioning for a minute. Got it. Oh. So one thing I mentioned is that this process is typically one-on-one, and it becomes a big conversation about, tell me more about this, tell me more about you, tell me more about that situation. So if there's anyone who has something that they want to speak on, if anyone has an example that they're curious about how to turn that into a bullet point. Some people can just, think of something like, oh yeah, I had this situation last week. And then maybe other times it takes a bit more work to come up with something. But if you have something you want to share, and there's anyone who wants to just kind of treat this as a one-on-one time and just be available to be heard by everyone just to see the process, then that is an option. I'm here, so you can tell me your story or ask a question or challenging work situations. Do we have some to consider?
in the meantime, I mean, so Claire typed, I just created a generic resume of types of classes I've taught and sent it to the studios I'm interested in working for. I include a cover letter describing why I want to be part of their community.
Mm-hmm.
So
Nice.
yeah.
Very nice. That looks fancy. I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. So the visual seems to be important, how much white space there is, and the layout, how bold your name is. See, I used to work in Germany, and I know there we provided photographs on resumes too, which is something I've wondered with all the social media happening, if that would be something specifically for teaching yoga, if that would be something, I don't know, it opens up a whole nother can of worms. But
yeah.
Well, and that's a real thing. If you know people where you are applying, like take mind of your Facebook photo, take mind of what people can just kind of generally skim off the top of something. If you send in a resume and they're already work friends on Facebook and you show up, I mean, things like that happen. Things like that get people fired all the time.
Yeah. And managers, like you're saying, they will scope you out.
Yep.
They will find and look and see what you're up to. I've had my own manager say that he does that with people.
Yep.
Yeah. So I agree with that. You mentioned, Kristen, possibly putting a picture on a resume. The ones that I've done, I've worked with like CEOs and people who worked in the government and that kind of thing. So I have not done pictures on a resume, but one of the things I mentioned in the beginning was, if it feels right to you, follow that. And it makes sense, I think, as a yoga teacher. I don't know that there's a specific way that yoga teachers are supposed to do a resume. I think it's, something that you can, we can decide here. I could just go out there and say, this is how we're doing, yoga resumes, and people can agree or disagree. But I think that it does make sense to put a picture on there if you'd like to, because when you're a yoga teacher, your picture is on the website. Typically there is a photo of you, and your bio is right there. So it seems to make sense that you would put a picture on there. And Claire, your resume was beautiful. I like the design that you had on there. And again, when I studied with the ladies who wrote the books on how to do resumes, that was not a thing, but I like it. I think that having a little creative element that works for you and expresses who you are, it definitely makes sense. There are resumes out there. You'll find, if you go to Live Career, that'll show you these cool templates or all sorts of resume templates. And yeah, a lot of them have that white space on there where it's, like a picture here. And some of them get really kind of funky where it's like, if you want to list what languages you speak, there's a picture of the flag next to each language, and it's fun. It's not necessary, but it can be a thing if you'd like. I personally tend to go with, where do they go? I tend to go with this one, where we've got the information there. You could put a picture here. There's also an option, and now I'm forgetting what it's called, but it's the thing that you scan. It's like a barcode of sorts. And there's a way to put that on your resume as well.
It's a QR code.
A QR code, yes. Okay, so you can also, and that would be for if you're emailing it or uploading it somewhere that people could access, information that way. Yeah, and another thing to mention, oh man, the name is escaping me. I'm totally drawing a blank on what it's called now. LinkedIn. That's what I'm trying to say. So having a LinkedIn page is another great thing to do too. I honestly don't know how many yoga teachers or yoga studios are using that, but it is also a great way to put your information on there. And when you do a LinkedIn page, you can talk in first person. That's where you can be a little more personable and say, hi, this is who I am, this is my experience. and have some links to click and that kind of thing. So another good thing to think about. And then you can have your LinkedIn clickable address if it's, you're sending it via the internet, or just, have it on your resume, even if you're handing it in printed. But that way someone can click right to that and read even more about you if they wish to do that. Yeah.
That just brings up social media for me. I mean, it seems like yoga is such a visual industry. Like, we need to think about almost like actors, unfortunately, probably is what I'd say. But thinking about when you do have a photo, like we have photos in our bio, what that photo says. Or like I have a ton of photos that I use for workshops, what that photo says about me, what that photo says about what my offering is. When they look at that photo, when someone looks at the photo, are they going to see me as like, I'm going to teach a hardcore power vinyasa flow, or am I more of a restorative teacher, just in that photo? But also you mentioned LinkedIn. I don't use LinkedIn. I'm not sure how many yoga teachers are really using it actively, but I know that tons of yoga teachers use Facebook. And so I almost wonder how much the social media really, even putting social media on your resume, depending on how you use your social media, obviously, from what Patrick was saying too. But I know a lot of yoga teachers using their Instagram account to sell what they're doing, or their Facebook account. That just takes social media to another level of responsibility in terms of how we use it, right? Especially when that gets tied into our identity, to our resume, to our bio, all of these things. Just some thoughts that came up for me.
We got a message from Claire. Okay.
So
I'm reading the chat right now.
What's that?
I have the chat in the main part of the page, so I'm just reading what Claire has written.
Yeah, the LinkedIn post job opportunities, especially part-time. So you found fitness style yoga positions there. Oh, good. So it's a good tool to use. I've also seen yoga teachers using Craigslist. So I know, right?
Yeah.
Kind of interesting place, but.
So one of the things is like, just consider whatever you're providing, like whatever information you're providing someone, they're taking it all as who they're hiring. So if like you're a super, want to teach the gentle, slow yoga, and they go to your webpage or they go to your Facebook and it's like pointed statements about a bunch of stuff and nothing but government postings or political posts, things like people will consume information about you in whatever kind of means is convenient for them. So it's like, just always remember that like as much information as you are providing, you're telling someone more about yourself. That might help, that might not help. That might be something you just want to do in person.
Yeah. Right. Figure out my screen here.
I think that would always kind of be the game, isn't it? That how much we tell about ourselves could serve us and it could not serve us, depending on what studio we're trying to get into. But at the same time, when the studio's creating its own identity, we're either going to fit into that or we're not. So that's kind of how business is going right now, at least.
Yeah. Well, and you might want to, I'm just thinking of things like off the mat and into the world, and some, I think there are some teachers out there that are more politically involved, so that might be your thing. So if you are a yoga teacher who wants to be politically involved and stand out that way socially, then maybe you want to note your activism or that kind of thing on your resume. So I'm trying to get back to the, I'm having technical difficulties now.
Yeah, did you see Devian's question?
Yeah, I saw it. I wanted to read it over again. You mentioned, I don't know, you can hear me, right, Devian? You're so 19 and worked in the food industry, and you're wondering how to get that noticed. Okay. There, maybe I can go back to the chat that way. I wanted to read it again. Having trouble making your resume genuine. You can make it genuine just by writing those stories down. Follow the SAR statements and just write about your experiences. So the food industry, I've worked in it, so I know it can be really challenging working for one in customer service and two with the people around you. Working, you know, with certain types of managers, that kind of thing, it can be really challenging. So just taking note of who you are or who you were and who you are in those situations that present themselves. How did you handle them? How did your actions benefit a situation? You know, if you want to share one in particular, you can, but yeah, my thought is just to look back on those experiences and just write down what you did, what was happening, how were people acting. I wrote a resume for a woman who worked for the government, for the Bureau of Land Management. She was, you know, making six figures, this kind of thing. And she was telling a story about a meeting where the men were arguing, and she, just through her, you know, social skills and humor, made light of the situation, got them to communicate a little better, and ultimately saved them $1 million deal. So just by being who she was. And these things matter. These things are really get to the gist of who you are. And when you get to tell that story, people start to understand what you're going to bring to a class, to a studio. Yeah, so it's hard to just say in brief right now, but I think you'll come up with it when you sit down with your own thoughts and just start to write down, you know, what happened with that strategy of situation, action, result. What was happening? What did you do? And what happened after that? So that's what will help you make it genuine. That's what will make you stand out. You don't have to have a lot of experience as a yoga teacher to get a job as a yoga teacher. I mean, everybody starts somewhere. I would highlight in this case, I would start with your education. So where you studied yoga and talk about that. And then I would go into your professional experience as well. And feel free to call yourself a professional in the food industry when you refer to yourself in your resume, depending on how it fits in. But yeah, hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, I really appreciate how much you're saying to write your story. I know that comes up so much, but the more, I mean, as yoga teachers, we bring ourselves. And if we don't bring ourselves, then we're not being authentic in our teaching. And so writing our story, getting clear about our story, what we learned from, grew from, what skills we had and highlighted, I think all of that ties into just being able to talk to people before and after yoga classes. Who are you as a yoga teacher? And really hone in on how you tell your story. So I really appreciate that. And that, to me, that goes right into writing your bio, which every yoga studio is going to want you to have, and make it interesting. It's not an easy thing to do. And it does, like you said, 8 hours. It does take a lot of time and a lot of and a lot of thought and a lot of self-reflection. So in a way, that's all very yoga. It's all time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and that's the main thing is sitting down and writing out your stories and telling your experiences. Those become your bullet points. They become your bio. So as opposed to just sitting down and saying, I'm going to get, you know, just write this all out, you've really got to sit and think for a minute. Yeah. And it gets interesting. It's a struggle. Like we all get writer's block. You know, at first you think like, oh, I can't think of anything. But once you start going, one story will remind you of another. And it'll get really interesting. And then light bulbs will start going off. You'll start writing your bullet points and then you'll just be in the flow. Just like how, you know, it might work that way when you take a yoga class. Like you're a little sticky when you show up, but then, you know, you're a little more fluid towards the end. Or when you start a hike, you know, it takes 20 minutes before you really get the blood flowing, that kind of thing. It's the same thing with writing. But that's the gist of it, which is why, you know, I've led a workshop before. I've never done a call like this before. So I can give you the basics, you know, put your time frames on there, put the dates that you worked that job, and make sure that it goes all the way to the right and leave, you know, a small margin. I can tell you those details. You can also look them up. You can also hop on Live Career and do that. The main part is just talking about who you are, and it helps sometimes to have another person to help you work through that, and that is mostly what I do for people. And then I take that and I do all that logistical stuff on paper. But yeah, you can do that. You can do that too. Yeah, I can't think of anything else. I'm sure, I mean, there's always more, but nothing that I can really do right here. You know, that's why people actually go to get their resume written. And it's not always cheap. So doing this on your own, it's a good skill to learn. And, you know, feel free, if, you know, to ask me a few more questions. If you want to find me on Facebook, I'll you know, throw me a couple questions if you want. It's okay. If you were to hire someone to write your resume, it's I'd say between $300 to $700, depending on your experience and what job you're looking for. Yeah, or you could just hop online and have someone do it for $20, but it may lack substance. They're not going to work through stories with you, and it may have spelling mistakes, that kind of thing. So yeah, I wish you luck on this adventure on your own, the 8-hour adventure, the 8-hour tour. And as I mentioned, I'll just leave you with, feel free to ask me a couple questions either right now or on Facebook. If something pops up later, you can find me on there, Kristine Pearson. Send a question or two.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kristine. I think you highlighted a lot of really good points and getting people started. And yeah, I think you can find Kristine on the Business of Yoga page and reach out to her that way. Or if you want to type your email in the chat box. That's my chihuahua in the background, so hold on.
My dog's napping.
Sorry,
right now.
Right now. There's noises in the basement, and she's getting it. But anyway, I wanted to quickly comment. I think the purpose of a biography is usually, I mean, it's good to have it written. I think most studios will, if you look at like the Kindness Yoga website, you'll see. So on the Kindness Yoga website, if you look at under the teachers, you'll see all of the teachers' photographs and then their bios written out right there. So it's a good thing to have handy. It can also be written later. But I think the work of writing the resume helps you to hone in on what you might talk about on your bio. So I just wanted to squeeze that in. But
yeah, and it does help to have another person, even, you know, a friend or a professional, to read over and come up with some questions to ask you, you know, because sometimes we're you know, when you can't see it from a different angle, when you have someone to see it from another angle, actually is helpful at times. So
yeah, absolutely.
And having someone else read it and being able to just say like, hey, what is this saying to you about me?
Yeah.
Like just to make sure that you're communicating what you're trying to communicate about yourself or what you offer.
Yeah, and I say it really is preparation to be professional as a yoga teacher. You know, I'd say that right now resumes aren't the main thing, you know, so don't stress too much over it, but I hear them being asked for more and more. So be prepared, be ahead of the game, you know, have a really professional looking resume that you can present.
You will stand out if your resume looks like this, because I see resumes come in a lot, even just at other jobs I've had, just, you know, people coming in at a quick glance, and at a quick glance they're looking like this, or just a bunch of information on one side of the page, like they just typed it up real quick on Word, you know, an hour before they swung by. So just having it look like you took some time is going to be the thing that gets your resume looked at in a stack of however many people. And I've had people tell me that about my resume, that I've got 70 resumes in the office and I put yours on top. So it makes sense to have it visually look appealing, like it's got some good solid information there, and that you've taken some time to make it visually appealing. And font big enough to read. And your name right there at the top. Yeah. I think that's all I've got to say. I know we're right at 9 right now, so unless anyone has questions, or again, feel free to, you know, message later if you do. Thank you everyone for joining. 2 pages resume is okay. Yeah, 2 pages is fine. That's usually the average of what I do. 2 pages. It's been said recently that it's okay to do a page and a half. It used to be that it needs to be a solid 1 or 2. People nowadays say it's okay if it's 1.5. I personally tend to be a little more particular because I like it to look visually put together. So I make it a solid page. I make my sentences a full sentence, equal in length, and then I make it a solid 2 pages if it needs to be. And we just add more information or take away more information. And that just comes through conversation and determining what's most important. Yeah. So 2 pages is okay.
Cool. Fantastic. Yeah, so please reach out if you have any more questions. If you want to listen to this again or share it with your friends, it'll be on my website, so KristineBoyleYoga.com, and I'll post the link as soon as it's up there. So thank you, Kristine.
Yep.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you everyone for being here. Have a good night.
Thank you. Stay cool.
Yeah, right?
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Kristine.